Hey guys, welcome to Edpuzzle. We have virtual today, so we're just going to do a little video to end up the Civil War while you guys working on your project. We just finished up with Gettysburg. We finished watching Glory, we watched Gettysburg, and now we're really just going to wind up the end of the war. July 4th, 1863, which is the day after the Battle of Gettysburg. That's a really joyous Independence Day in America. It's 87 years after the birth of the country. And it looks like we're heading towards war after what had been a really terrible year, at least to begin 1863. After this, we have the Battle of Vicksburg, which is in your project. Ulysses S. Grant, in what's really considered to be like the perfect victory, captures Vicksburg, which is on the mouth of the Mississippi, really controls access to the Mississippi, and will complete the Anaconda Plan. And then a few months later, November 19th, 1863, there's a memorial held at Gettysburg to honor those that died. 15,000 people come, and the featured speaker is a guy named Edward Everett from Massachusetts. Generally, we think today that this president, whoever he or she is, would be really the keynote speaker. But Lincoln was invited really more as an afterthought because they needed to fill the program. So they asked Lincoln to come. Again, he was the secondary speaker. Everett is the keynote. So Everett delivers this long 2-hour speech. It's really an incredible speech if you ever listen to it. But then President Lincoln stands up and gives really just a very brief 2-minute speech. Most Americans thought it was really just unpresidential, not nearly worthy of the experience. He was criticized in several newspapers the day after. Everett, on the other hand, wrote to Lincoln the following day and said, "I wish I could flatter myself that I had come as near to the central idea of the occasion in 2 hours as you did in 2 minutes." And you're going to listen to that right now. All right, so you've listened to the Gettysburg Address, and you can really tell just how really incredible that speech is. And then after that, it's really just a matter of getting the Confederacy to officially surrender. And that's really executed through Sherman's March to the Sea, which again is another one of the projects that we presented. As the year ends in 1864, following Vicksburg, President Lincoln is very concerned about his chances for re-election. He's running against a guy named George McClellan, who, if you remember, was one of his very first generals of the war that he replaced. And he was convinced he was going to lose. He said, famously, "I'm going to be beaten, and unless some great changes take place, badly beaten." So he was very concerned. Now, he's won the Battle of Gettysburg. He's won Vicksburg. So his chances of re-election are looking a lot better. But he needs something to officially really turn the tide. And that will be done by putting Ulysses S. Grant, the hero of Vicksburg, in charge of the Union Army. And he's now going to be the one executing Lincoln's plans. Grant's right-hand man, who he's going to put in charge of fighting in the West, is the guy you see on the screen here, William Tecumseh Sherman. And Sherman's target is Atlanta, Georgia, really the last big stronghold in the state of Georgia. And he lays siege to the city for months until he finally gets the Confederates to flee the city. He famously writes a letter to the mayor of Atlanta, which you're going to read right now, telling them that I'm going to burn the city. And he doesn't want to. He's not enjoying it. He says war is cruelty. There's no use trying to reform it. The crueler it is, the sooner it will be over. He believes that decimating the South will get this war to end much faster and will hopefully teach them a lesson. So now that you've read that, you really can kind of get the idea behind Sherman. He was just a madman and was just absolutely hell-bent on Southern destruction. And famously said that the South won't recover for 50 years as a result of his work. After the capture of Atlanta, he then marches, as you can see on this map, south towards the city of Savannah, Georgia, which is right on the coast. It's a 300-mile march where he said he was going to, quote, "make Georgia howl," unquote, and he destroys everything in his path. It's what we call total war. We are going to destroy anything that could be of use to the South: plantations, railroads, villages, doesn't matter. He's going to burn them all and destroy them. And in an article you're going to read tonight, really talks about that path of destruction. This is all going on as the election of 1864 is coming up. And this really bolsters Lincoln's chances to win. And he also makes a very Machiavellian move by appointing Southern Democrat Andrew Johnson, former Democrat Andrew Johnson of Tennessee, to his ticket as the vice president. He was a former slave owner. It's a very cunning move on his part. He winds up winning in basically a giant landslide because of the military success. And just a few days after the election, Sherman writes to Lincoln. He says, "I beg to present you as a Christmas gift the city of Savannah." So he has completed his march to the sea, which is really the end of the war. Because we're going to see Lee's army has now shrunk. It's almost about 35,000 people. Very, very little left. They're starving. They're really just like limping along. And they get cornered in Virginia at a small town called Appomattox Courthouse, which is one of your vocab words. All the while this is going on, Lincoln has begun the plan for what we call Reconstruction. What's going to happen after the war? And we're also seeing that America is really opposed to slavery in a lot of ways. They're going to pass the 13th Amendment, which will be ratified by the states. Lincoln, in 1865, just after he's inaugurated, gives his second inaugural address, which you're going to read now. And you're going to see the comparison between the first and the second. So after Lincoln's inauguration on March 4th, about a month later, Lee's army gets cornered in Appomattox. And his subordinates are begging him not to surrender, even though they're completely surrounded and completely outnumbered. Lee eventually decides to surrender, and he meets, as you can see in this photo here, at the home of Wilmer McLean. Really interesting about Wilmer McLean because his home was where the war started. His home was in Manassas, just at the first Battle of Bull Run. He then leaves Maryland, moves to Appomattox Courthouse in Virginia to escape the war, and it winds up ending in his home. It's a really, really interesting dichotomy. And you can see the difference here between Lee and Grant. Grant was very much a soldier. He was a drunk, pretty dirty guy. Lee, on the other hand, very formal, wears his formal military garb, surrenders his sword. And what's important here is that we see Grant offers very generous terms to the Confederates. He lets them take their mules home. They can keep their guns. They can return to their homes as long as they obey the rules of Reconstruction. And this is really reinforcing Lincoln's plan of what we call the prodigal son view, accepting the South back in. And Grant famously says, "The rebels are our countrymen again." Now, this is a great way to end the war. We have this nice, peaceful, really nice moment in American history where we've bound the nation's wounds. Unfortunately, that's not how we remember the end of the war. All throughout the war, there had been a plan to execute Lincoln, or at least to capture him and then ransom him, force the United States to surrender. This group of co-conspirators led by a guy named John Wilkes Booth, an actor from Maryland. As the war is clearly coming to an end, they decide they're just going to assassinate Lincoln and the heads of the government. Johnson, they would kill Grant. And Wilkes Booth is responsible for killing Lincoln. April 14th, 1865, so just a couple days after the surrender of Lee, Booth slips into Ford's Theater, which is where Lincoln and his wife Mary Todd were attending the showing of the play Our American Cousin. Lincoln had a separate booth for himself. Lincoln's bodyguard, as the story goes, moved his post to get into a better view for the real funny part of the play. Booth slips in behind Lincoln, and right during that funny part of the play, shoots Lincoln in the back of the head. It comes in behind his left ear, lodges behind his eye. Everyone hears it. Booth jumps from the balcony and yells, "Sic semper tyrannis, the South will rise again." Sic semper tyrannis in Latin means death to tyrants. So basically saying here that Lincoln is a tyrant. He's crushed the South will rise again. He lands, he breaks his leg on impact, and he limps to a nearby barn, a warehouse just across the street, where he's cornered and shot and killed by a guy named Sergeant Boston Corbin, and there's a lot of controversy that surrounds that. Lincoln dies the next morning, and he has this long funeral train back to his home in Springfield, Illinois, the last 2 weeks. So instead of remembering Lee's surrender to Grant on peaceful terms, binding of the nation's wounds, we're bringing the country back together. Instead, what we remember about the Civil War is Lincoln's death. And this will forever impact the future of the South in Reconstruction.